Thank you. We're live.
Senate Education Committee, April 17th, 2025. So long afternoon in front of us. We'll be starting with Julia Richter from JFO and ask Julia to come in just to talk to us about district spending analysis as passed by the House and what it might look under different scenarios. And I know you're ready to go, so you know all of us, so we will turn it over to you.
Great, thanks. I'm Julia Richter, Joint Fiscal Office. There is a slide deck on the committee page under my name. It's also printed out in front of you. Thanks to Will, not thanks to me, but Chair, would you like me to go ahead and share my screen?
Yeah, I think just mostly for people at home who don't have it here, but yes, for people watching.
All right.
From elsewhere.
Sure. So as the chair mentioned, he asked me to do some analysis of H454 as passed by the House, the foundation formula, education opportunity payments, varsity and small school grants that are included in H454 as passed by the House, and what those payments would look like, and some comparison analysis across different district and region configurations.
Yes.
So I know you all know this, but JFO, we're nonpartisan, unbiased fiscal analysis. I think it's helpful to frame all of the testimony with that. It's now boilerplate in our slide deck. Slide deck format. So briefly touching on the underlying pieces of the analysis, some level setting reminders, and then an overview of the actual education opportunity payment, how it would be calculated under H454, as well as the varsity and small school grants as passed by the House, and then that comparison analysis across, I believe the chair asked for 4 different district configurations. So underlying the analysis is using education spending. So you'll recall that this is a technical term. We spoke about this, I guess, months ago. And I know you've spoken about it at other times. This is a term in education finance that refers to a school district's total budget minus its offsetting revenues. So what it gets in categorical aid from the feds and the state, tuition revenues, their reserves. And so we are using this as a baseline for comparing the education opportunity payment, the foundation formula amounts against FY25 education spending. And this follows the analysis that has been presented by the administration of comparing foundation amounts against ed spending. We refer to the aggregate statewide ed spending as the education payment. And level setting, it was about 1.9 billion in fiscal year 2025. So you know that that's less than the total uses of the ed fund, but that's what we're using.
Can I ask a question? So, I'm trying to make sure my ed finance knowledge is super solid going into being here after many years. Surplus or deficit? Can the district run a surplus or deficit and they are solely responsible for that? And did we have to contemplate that in 454? What happens if they have a surplus or deficit in some phase of the transition?
So that has not been contemplated in 454 is my understanding. I invite Beth to pipe up whenever. I will say, yes, school districts can. They can also put dollars in reserves and pull them out in future years. There are current law provisions, I believe, in terms of what happens in terms of merging of school districts. I don't believe H454 comments on any change to that.
Okay, right. So a district couldn't run a surplus consistently, could they? Would we step in to like protect taxpayers in some context from that, or?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Are they completely free without any state input to keep a surplus year to year to run a surplus?
The way that like taking a step back, the school district has built its budget.
Yeah.
That budget is approved by local voters.
Mhm.
It needs to be approved by local voters. Once it's approved by local voters, we then calculate its education spending,
Mhm.
which is its total budget minus its offsetting revenues. So if it's using prior year surplus to reduce their budget in the future year, then that will impact their tax rate. But the education spending, this is the amount that's
Right.
going to impact the local tax rate. So the more that a school district draws per pupil from the education fund, the higher its monthly tax rate is going to be.
Do they need to draw surplus? Are they required to use their surplus?
No, it's part of their
Okay,
budgeting.
okay.
Okay, so
So that's what we're using to compare against is this term education spending, which we use in most analysis. I know I'm not in here as much as I'm in other committees, but often we're talking about education spending. We're also talking about Vermont's long-term average daily membership. Essentially, this is the average number of kids in school, right? This is what we use in our financing formula that we apply the weights against. FY25, this is 83,400, give or take. And we know that count has been declining over time. So I did include this slide here because I think it's important to hold some of the really big caveats in our mind before looking at analysis. So this preliminary analysis, we're looking at FY25 data, an analysis that reflects that data. We're talking about FY30, perhaps, of the foundation formula kicking in. We know that there will be inflationary changes. We know there will be changes in student demographics. We know there's outstanding district boundaries that have still not been drawn. So I want to emphasize preliminary. We are still working on analysis of the special education weights and the tiered English learner weights. So this is including a flat English learner weight and no special ed weight. And we're looking at different district boundary constructs, but also we know that district boundaries will of course impact the amount of funding going to a district. And will impact the relative change that we're looking at. So we'll see here that dependent on different district configurations, you'll see different swings in districts or regions of the state, depending on where those lines are drawn. So H454, calculating the education opportunity payment or the EOP and the sparsity and small school grants. So it uses the cost adjustments and weights that were included in Professor Dr. Colby's memo. And if a district qualifies, it would also receive a sparsity and small school grant corresponding with a cost adjustment in the memo. I believe that we did speak about this yesterday in the joint hearing. So the way that the education opportunity payment would be calculated in the foundation formula is it would essentially take the base amount, which H454 from the House has a 15,033, and multiplies it by the district's long-term weighted average daily membership. That weighted average daily membership is essentially, on average, how many kids are in the school district, plus all of the weights that apply to each of those kids in the school district. This is a screenshot that I've included from the Dr. Colby memo that the House used for these numbers.
yes,
Just a quick question. Originally, when the plan came out, we talked about the opportunity payment, it was 13, now it's 15 and change. What's the difference?
Yeah, so the administration's proposal had a base amount of 13,200. Also different weights and weighting categories. The difference is reflected in differing underlying methodologies and policy choices.
and are you in a position to help us understand a little bit more about the weights on this page?
Yeah, of course.
What does that actually translate to?
In terms of dollars,
Well, looking, So students experiencing economic disadvantage. Oh, it just goes up a little bit. The 1.02 translates, just to make sure, I just want to make sure I understand this, to $300.
Actually, no, the way of interpreting this is that, these are additive weights. Meaning
Oh,
that
additive will be additive.
I can't zoom that, I can't make that bigger on the screen or than my.
Do you want to look?
Which is out, I have my.
I see, okay.
Okay, but, so the way to interpret this is if a student were to have not fit into any of these weighting categories, they're not an English learner, they're not from an economically disadvantaged background. They live in an urban place, they don't fit into any of the weighting categories, then the foundation formula would assign $15,033 for that student in FY 25. We go into out years, that 1533 is going to be adjusted for inflation increased. If a student were to be from an economically disadvantaged background, then it would be the 1533 plus the 15334.
Yeah. Okay.
For that student. The way that the foundation formula works is the weight is being applied to the long term, to the pupil count. So it's the pupil count applying all of the weight. So we have the weighted pupil count, and then that weighted pupil count is being multiplied by the base figure.
And if I understood correctly from yesterday, actually that the student could fit a couple of these other categories, and it's all cumulative.
That's correct. So they're
All
additive.
All additive.
They're all additive and they're not mutually exclusive. So you could have a student from an economically disadvantaged background that's an English learner in a sparse, well, the sparsity in small schools is aside, but an English learner from an economically disadvantaged background with a disability, that student would receive each one of those weights added together, and that would be added to the district's pupil count.
So like $54,000. Am I?
Mhm.
Okay, so if you added up that whole column, because a student hit all of those categories, that amount is what we're talking about a district could get for that student.
For that student, if they were in that, all of those weighting categories, that's correct.
Center weeks.
The English learners, if I understood the bill, it's proposed that there's 4 tiers, at least when it's
Yeah, so I appreciate that. What we're looking at here is a reflection of the modeling, because currently the tiered EL data is too suppressed for us to be able to do any sort of meaningful analysis, meaning that student counts, non-zero student counts up to 11 are suppressed. So we're not able to know how many EL students fit into the different categories. So we're working with the AOE to get the non-suppressed data so that we can do that analysis. But for right now, we are using the flat EL weight, so we can do the analysis with the data that has been shared with us.
roughly, when do you think you'll have that analysis done? Because obviously we need something to be able to compare the current rates and the total cost.
That's
the-
when we are able to establish an MOU with the agency where they will share the data with us.
Next week.
I would, that's a question for the agency.
Have you?
I wasn't
Is
aware
that-
of the decision, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Concerning.
Oh, I mean, we had a concern,
Okay,
I will say, from my perspective, concerning has too much value judgment, and I
Okay.
try to stay away from value judgment words. I would say that we have English language learner data. We know the number of EL students in the state. We just don't know within a district how many fit into category 1, 2, what their level of proficiency is. But as we go through, you will see in the analysis that we are able to estimate based on the EL data that we have, the education opportunity coming from districts.
but they're not withholding information from you? Have you been advocating for this information for a long time?
We are, I would say this is pretty standard. This is,
Okay.
because you don't, have me coming in here and talking about data as much, there's a lot of privacy issues around children, right? So we need to make sure that their privacy is, being accounted for. So we're actively working with the AOE to establish a contract, but it has to go through all of the legal channels, which are way outside of my daily life. I don't understand.
Senator Shi.
Thank you. So I'm looking at the base cost per student and I don't have my chart in front of me. I think the AOE gave us a while back, but do you happen to know how this compares to other states? Because I have if I'm remembering correctly, I think 15,000 as the base would be either the first or the second highest amount for a base compared to all the other states.
I would need to follow up. I certainly can. I will also caution the direct state to state comparison. While it can be a helpful benchmark or is a helpful benchmark, it's also important to keep in mind the weights that are included as well. So how much overall funding is going to students. The other piece is most states have the state portion and then also have a big local share where local property taxes are levied to add more to education funding, where we have a statewide education fund. So I would just raise the caution flag of state by state comparisons are not always apples to apples or even apples to oranges.
Makes sense.
Thank you.
I'm just really struggling. I feel like there's a really important piece to understand. I was looking for my AOE chart, but like if you had 20 of students who hit all these categories in one, and that's $1 million that an institution would get, over $1 million for 20 students.
If all of these numbers added up together,
Uh-huh.
multiplied by 20 is $1 million, then yes, I mean, the way that,
How does that compare to what we're doing right now?
that's where we're going.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, let's get good.
That slides, how many slides are in the stack? 35. That slide's probably 15 through 35.
Okay.
Right now, we're level setting of everything that I'm assuming going into my analysis before I show you the numbers, which I know is less satisfying, but
Let's go. Good. It's good.
I'm all about the
We
caveat.
need to do it.
So that's how we calculate an education opportunity payment. Here's how we would calculate a district's sparsity and small school grant. So I want to name a couple of things here. This is another place in which the bill establishes sparsity and small school grants. The sparsity grant is if a district has a population less than 55 people per square mile, then it would be eligible for a sparsity grant, which would be calculated by multiplying the public school enrollment, the enrollment of all public schools in that sparse district by the cost adjustment, 1954. Summed it all up and that would be going to the district. There's also rules, a definition that the state board still needs to establish of small by necessity. So if a school is deemed small by necessity, which still has not been defined, then it would be eligible for a small school grant, which would be calculated by multiplying the enrollment of all of those small by necessity schools by the 3,157. Because that definition has not yet been made, what I've done is I've used the current law definition for receiving a small school weight, which is essentially if you are a small school in a sparse district, then you get a small school weight. So this could change depending on the state board's determination of small by necessity.
And that now on the chart is the 1951.
Correct.
What we don't have in here, a chart that looks like this, but is the current weights.
We don't have that. The reason I didn't include that is because our current funding formula has tax capacity weights.
Right.
So you'll recall that the weights that's used in the current funding formula are connected with tax rates rather than the actual amount of dollars flowing to a school district. So those are not comparable weighting categories because they exist in completely distinct financing formulas. I can name for you that H454 maintains weighting categories that we have in current law. So it maintains the weighting categories of students from economically disadvantaged backgrounds, English learners. We have weighting categories for small schools and sparse districts. That creates a grant for those. We have a weighting category for grade range. So 6 through 12 students are weighted. This repeals that weight. It adds the weight of special education. I will note that the weights that we are seeing here were all calculated by Dr. Colby using the same models that were used for calculating the current law weights. So the weights that were established in Act 127 were calculated by Dr. Colby. She was contracted with this year and provided updated data to use that weighting model from 2019 to calculate foundation formula weights consistent with current law and current data. It's helpful.
So
Any insights into why there's two different categories here? So where I'm going is if a district or area has a population with very few people per square mile, it is in fact small by necessity. So it seems to be kind of like dual coverage for the same issue. I'm wondering if there's any insights you picked up on why there's two different categories.
So two things. Big picture, I guess three things. Big picture, I would really encourage if you have specific questions about the numbers and the methodology to talk with Dr. Colby directly.
it's coming in a second.
Oh, perfect. Okay. Because if I can avoid it, I don't want to speak to somebody else's work. That being said, essentially the way that the modeling works is it controls for all of the factors and then looks at what are the statistically significant cost adjustments. And so sparsity was determined to be a necessary cost adjustment, as was small schools. There is a memo, this is what I'm referencing. There is a memo that she produced, and I can share this with Will to share with the committee, that provides more information into the background of the updates and interpreting the cost adjustment categories that could be helpful. There's also the 2019 pupil weighting factors report, which I can also share with Will. That has a lot more detail that was underlying the original analysis, because this is the representation of updating that 2019 analysis. Mm-hmm.
The weights were left updated in 20.
The current law weights
Yeah.
in Act 127,
It's 22.
which I think was, I'm not going, somewhere around that.
So
Okay, so now we're getting into the comparison. Thanks for bearing with me with all of the caveats and background. So the first, I'll just say, I think there's 4 or 5 different modeling exercises I performed here. What I did was I started from the most number of districts or regions to the fewest. So we're slowly narrowing. So this is current law. And these are all configurations that the chair asked for me to include like that. So current law districts, we know there's 119 school districts under current law that have really varied student counts, demographics, operating status. No school district has more than 5% of Vermont students. I was interested, Champlain Valley is the largest with 4.9%. And we're all, this whole analysis is looking at 125 data. We also have a couple of unoperated, non-operating cores. So sometimes, you hear 121, sometimes you hear 122, sometimes 119. That's why we have a difference. So this is I did all of this analysis, so I said, under the current governance structure, how much would each of the current law school districts receive from an education opportunity payment, sparsity grants and small school grants compared to what their FY25 education spending was. What we're looking at here is that 68 current law districts would see an estimated increase in funding compared to education spending, while 53 would experience an estimated decrease, right? All of those caveats in mind.
So this page, just to make sure I understand it, this is all above the line, so this is all districts that get more.
No, thank you. So I've tried to be consistent with colors and formatting throughout the slide deck, so it is important to understand it. What we're looking at here is a histogram. So each one of these columns represents districts. On the x-axis, we see the bins or the groupings. So for instance, this 22 column is within the bin of -5% to 0%, meaning that 22 districts would see an estimated decrease between 0% and relative 5% decrease. It's also important to note that these are relative percentage changes because I'm looking at the relative percentage change within the district. So essentially the percentage change is weighted based off of how large that school district education spending is.
Sarah, should go.
Yes, just in the context of this conversation, can you please clarify for me again? When we say funding, are we talking about the money that must be raised from property taxes?
Not necessarily. So what we're looking at here is we're completely forgetting about, not forgetting, but ignoring the different revenue streams into the education fund. So what we're looking at here are the dollars going to school districts. We know that about more than 2/3 or around there of the ed fund is from property taxes. We know that H454 makes changes to property taxes, but here we're holding everything constant and we're saying, what are the comparisons between what the foundation formula would give current districts compared to what current districts' education spending would be?
And when you said the foundation program, you are employed Dr. Colby's April 3rd points.
Yes, I'm using H454 as passed by the House, which is the education opportunity payment plus the sparsity grant plus the small school grant. So we know that spending, or the estimate is that spending would increase overall by 2%. However, how that would shake out across current law districts, we see here that it would be shake out. There'd be very changes based on.
Got all your pieces and part there?
Yeah, I'm saving the day. Sorry, what?
No, he had a very legitimate part. So just relax, we're okay. And, okay. Keep going.
Okay. So that's what we're looking at here is the relative percentage difference. All of the formatting is the same. So all of the, if you can see colors, this is green, all of the green histograms are representing relative percentage changes. The other way that I've oriented the data for you is to look at difference in funding per long-term ADM, right? Because in this previous slide, all of the districts, regardless of size and number of pupils, are being counted uniformly. Here we're looking at the dollar difference in funding per student, essentially. So the same way to interpret this, 33 districts would see a increase of funding per student between 0 and 2,500. So I mean, interpret this graph. 60. So one way that I was curious when I was working on the analysis is how big of a swing would districts be seeing, right? And so I was thinking, based off of these bins, how many districts would experience an estimated change of either more or less than no more than 2,500. So either they decrease by 22,499 or they increase up to 2,499. And we see that there's 64 districts that would see an estimated absolute difference, less than 2,500 under the current law districts.
So, why does this not add up to 119? Because every district must go up or down by something.
Does it not?
It does.
It does?
If you have them all.
Okay,
It should.
okay. Oh,
Just keeping you
okay,
on your
I guess,
toes.
yeah, okay, yeah, okay.
64 is a good percentage.
The 64 is just talking about these two center columns that are experiencing the least amount of change in the funding structure.
You're right, it does.
Phew.
Yeah.
It's made my
Yeah.
hands sweat a little bit next to chair.
I was looking it up, but I thought, got it.
All right. That's current law.
Don't want to mess with JFO.
Very nice.
Well, I
crowd.
figured there was a reason. I was just.
So that's current law. So then I did the same exercise for other permutations. So now this exercise, I did it with the VSBA, Vermont School Boards Association regions. These are the regions. This was 11 regions. The House was looking at modeling using this. I believe I've also shown modeling to perhaps this committee, certainly finance, following these regions. I've included this table here to remind you all or show sort of the breakdown of student count by each of these regions. So we see the total number of students in this FY25 long-term ADM, right? LT-ADM, essentially number of kids. And then this far right column is the percentage of the state's share. So you see that 5% of the state's pupil counts are in the Addison region. I like to know the numbers behind graphs, which is why I've included this table, but I didn't make big graphs because I know that they could be more easy to digest. But this is essentially the background modeling that we see underlying the graphs. So what we're looking at here is each of those regions, what their FY25 education spending would have been if that region were a district. So what I did was I essentially aggregated up all of the school districts within each of those regions, their education spending. This next column shows you that total education opportunity payments and grants as outlined in H454. This next column shows you the difference in spending. So if it's a negative, it's saying that there would be less from H454 foundation formula than education spending.
In current education spending.
Correct. All of it at FY25. And this final column is that relative difference. I thought folks might be interested, so I included a star here if a district would be eligible for the Star-City grant. And then the underlying small schools grant as well, based on my modeling. So here we still see with the VSBA regions an estimated relative increase of 2% from FY25 ed spending to the H454 funding formula.
And I don't know if you want to do this now or later, but how did we end up with 2% more?
It's really the structure of the formula.
What's the policy decisions of providing that? Okay.
Right. So when you think about what is determining the numbers of the total education opportunity payment and grants, you've got your constant, right? You've got the number of kids. That's not a policy choice. How many kids are in school, right? The foundation formula then applies those weights for certain weighting categories. That is a policy choice, both the weighting categories and the associated weights. And then you have the base amount, which is also a policy choice. And we know that everything in H 454 reflects the Colby April memo.
Okay.
Is that,
Yeah, no, yeah,
Can I ask a question?
yes,
When we did Act 127, but is that what it is?
Mhm.
Act 127. I'm really terrible with numbers.
sure.
Did we at that point pull apart English language learners as separate from economically disadvantaged?
yeah,
Okay, good. So this tracks similarly that those have already been separated.
Yeah.
Okay, because when I look at this, I think it generally makes, I'm looking at what I think are lower income areas by and large that are receiving an increase. Do you see like another big factor in the relative difference in spending?
so I think that there's a couple of different ways to think about this.
Yeah.
So one thing that I would flag is when we're looking at difference in spending, we're looking at what the foundation formula would give versus what is the current education spending. So we know that there's significant variation across the state in terms of current education spending. So when we're looking at the difference, if you have one region that is consistently a high spending region
Okay, yeah.
versus another region that's consistently a low spending region,
Right.
you may see that one region is seeing a decrease and one is experiencing an increase when they may be receiving the same amount of funding. That being said, to your point, that the more under a foundation formula, because the weights are a significant determination of how much funding a school district would receive, the weights and the weighting categories will impact the amount of dollars that a district receives. So too will those district boundaries, right? How many students are being captured and where are those lines drawn will determine both the students within them, as well as if there is a sparsity grant, depending on how the lines are drawn, you'll see throughout the analysis, different regions are identified as sparse or not sparse, dependent on where the lines are drawn,
Right.
which would impact funding.
Well said. Okay, that's really helpful.
So you have, I don't know, math, graphing background. It's a little painful to put a histogram with so few regions and so many bins. However, I try to stay consistent across the slide deck. So there's my caveat here, but this is a picture of what we were just looking at in terms of the slide, right? So here we see that 4 of the VSBA regions would experience an estimated increase between 0 and 5%. This chart, same intuition as well as the previous chart, that 8 out of the 11 would experience that absolute difference. So 2,500 either side of 0. 8 out of the 11 would see that. Now, moving on to the configurations from Senator Baumgart's of the potential SUs and SDs. So I then perform the same analysis within these Baumgart's potential SD and SUs. I want to note I focused solely at the SDSU level for simplicity. So we didn't look at this right hand, the districts within the SUs. This is the total long-term ADM, the number of students within each of these configurations. That percentage is what we're seeing here in the far right column. Again, this next slide is a table representing the same information, but now with the new configurations that we were previously looking at. So here we see that 5 of the configurations would experience an estimated increase in funding, while 5 would experience an estimated decrease. Overall spending would still increase by an estimated 2%. This gets back to Senator Hinsdale's question of the distribution of funds. We can see that really how the lines are drawn determines those changes.
And this is applying the house.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, okay.
Yep. So all of the underlying calculations I have held constant. So we're applying all of the same weights, the same base, the same FY25 at spending, the same everything. The only change that we're looking at between each of these slides is seeing that we're seeing that dependent on these district boundaries and the district configurations, the shift of funds across districts, right? And which districts are identified would fall under the sparsity category. So this is the histogram for that relative percentage change here with the bond arts configurations. Again, house passed age 454. This is the same data that we just saw in the table now in a graph. And then again, this is looking at that swing, you know, how much school districts are hovering around or would be around that 0, give or take. And so here we see 8 of the 10 configurations would not experience a change in funding either up or down greater than 20.
Good, sir.
Yes.
To kind of compare apples to apples, why didn't you use 119 districts that just group them into the new SUs, or in this case, the 5 larger districts, to be able to see where the differences from current formula to future formula? Who's winning, who's losing?
So I would say that's this presentation is looking at current to future.
Yeah, they're right, but to us,
H454
the delta, the difference is between what they were currently experiencing, what the individual, the current individual small or very small district would experience, so that we know the net effect on all portions of the state.
So that was captured in the first, that's what we were looking at here in the current law school districts, the 119. So we're looking at the current law school districts.
So that doesn't, the number of larger districts that we migrate to has no bearing. That doesn't, but never mind. Let me think about this a little bit more. Just want to make sure we're comparing the net effect. But anyway, I'll stop. Interesting.
Okay. If I may, I think I may understand the question that you're getting at, which is thinking about with potential changes down the line, not necessarily, this is not capturing all of those changes. H450, because H454 as passed by the House does not draw district boundaries, we do not know the future state of district boundaries.
You are comparing it, the bond runs example, whatever. Yes. Yeah, but Secretary of Education's example, there are 3 different unique examples in here. Let me just.
So the comparisons that I'm presenting here were requested by the chair. So that's how I've chosen them.
But so can I ask what I've taken away is on page 13 with the current law school district, if any of us wanted to ask how our school district would be impacted by the new formula, you could pull that out with us individually. So you could show us any of our district
Mhm.
and apply the proposed formula and show us if the budget would get cut in real terms
Yes,
or increased.
yes, the only, piece of caution that I would offer in terms of that is that the bill is moving to this future state.
Right.
In which if you have a low spending district being merged or consolidated with a high spending district together, their budget could be pretty similar,
Yeah,
but you would be, there would be different experiences dependent on who's being consolidated
right.
together.
Right. And you also can't determine the population in a future state. So you could have a huge influx of English language learners
I
and
think
then
we
they
can for
disappear.
the foreseeable future. That's not entirely impossible. You create assumptions and you model it.
Well, you could do some modeling, not really well for immigration right now, not really well for English language learners.
Oh, right now? we probably
Yeah,
can.
right now.
I
we can.
think so.
Well, let's pick up where we were.
All right.
We left off here.
I believe we were here looking at,
And then if I could just for a second, but I do believe that we can make assumptions that say, 10 years from now, we experience this and then we model it. Or we have an option B, we experience a different, assumptions on English language learners and such, we model.
Well, sure, but if 20 students
Oh,
can
wow.
create a huge swing, right? Like I said, if you had 20 students who met, they were low income and English language learners, you could have $1 million swing in either direction in your budget.
Right, but we can model that. That's the way. It's not unknown because we can model it. We would know based on the weights that are contained in the current draft bill.
Well, if we have no more English language learners and we all get poorer under this administration, we could certainly model that.
No, it's on my point. So my point is that you can model if we make assumptions about how many new English language learners or low income folks will be in Vermont in 5 years or 10 years. We can model that.
You just wouldn't be basing it off of, you don't know if you trust your assumption that you're modeling it off of.
Well, you accept only the assumptions that you want to accept. That's what all models for the future.
Well, yeah, I think, so what you're saying is we can just say if you got 5% more, it would do this.
You can model
Yeah,
anything.
yeah, you can model
Model
it, and that's, okay. So did you have a question? Some of those?
No, I heard comparing low spending districts now. A lot of lower spending districts did so because they couldn't pass their budget.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure that, we all start out on the same level. And that's my point.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Let's keep going. So we're on to this one, right?
I believe so. So this was the last configuration I was asked to model, which was the 5 proposed districts by the administration. So you'll recall that the transformation proposal proposed to move to 5 regional districts. This is that breakdown of the state's share of pupils across those proposed districts. So you see the Champlain Valley at 41% with the largest percentage, Northeast at the lowest percentage at 12%. And then applying the House passed H454 funding across those 5 districts, we would see that 3 would experience an estimated increase in funding compared to ed spending, while 2 would experience an estimated decrease. Here we see that the relative change would be closer to 0%, largely reflective of the decrease in the sparsity and small school grants available in this, because Northeast would be the only region eligible for a sparsity grant.
Under the weights that were used in the House version. So we're talking about,
Yes, everything is,
yeah, I know, yeah.
but I appreciate you continuing to remind, yes.
Yeah.
So yeah,
So the weights is it accurate? Would I be accurate if I said it's the weights that are really driving these changes?
I would say the changes in spending.
Well, or in what it would do for which districts would go up and which would go down.
I would say the weights impact that, as well as the base amount, as well as the district configurations. So the weighting categories, the weights, the base amount, and the district configurations are the levers that we're looking at here.
I just want to make sure I understand that you have, no one's asked yet for this to be done with the administration's proposed formula? Or you're waiting on a MOU to do that one?
No, I've not been asked to present on the administration's.
Okay.
On the other two, correct? Because we know what on the last one, that would be correct.
Yeah, just
Yeah,
as
it would be just a two.
Well, but we haven't had JFO do the analysis based on there.
Yes, that is correct. We do have some questions that we would need to sort out before
Right.
we were able to
Do an apples to apples.
do some of that modeling.
Yeah, these two you can do because they're concrete, you know the existing, the house pass.
Again, same way of visualizing the information we were just looking at in the table here. And in this version, we see that all of the, across the 5 districts, that all would see an absolute difference in funding of less than 2,500 per pupil. One slide, I think we've talked about all of this, but I just wanted to note,
So before you go on, just to, I think state the obvious, would it be accurate to say that one thing one conclusion we could draw from this graph with the administration was listen, the larger the districts, the more things tend to get smoothed out,
I think,
less you have wild swings. Is that?
In general, probably, and I don't feel like I can say it fully 100% yes or fully 100% no, because again, I know I keep saying this, but it depends on the districts.
Yeah.
Right. So what we do see in this analysis is that with larger district configurations, these districts would be consolidated, so we're not seeing as significant swings. However, the districts and their boundaries would significantly impact the impacts across the
Right.
state.
Like it would be invisible,
Yes.
but it wouldn't be not happening. It would be contained within that district, but if it would depend then on how the money is distributed
By the
to the
district.
student,
But, yeah,
you just lose the visibility on where that's happening. That's all.
yes, although, again, I don't want to beat the sports, but with the larger districts, the swing, the amount of money going to a district would be relatively similar with these 5 larger districts. There's a little bit of variation, but they would be getting per pupil something would work out to very, very close to zero change as compared to the 119 where you had pretty wild swings up and down.
Mhm.
That was much.
I guess that's just like a mathematical reality.
Yeah.
Like
yeah,
if you had 2
yeah.
districts.
Yeah.
And the Kingdom of Chittenden County was still in them, you might not see some of the inequities because they'd be 1 district. But they could still exist in terms
Well,
of.
that would depend on how they spent the money internally in the
Right,
district.
right.
Yeah.
But.
Yeah.
We just wouldn't see it as the state, but it could still be happening.
Yeah, depending on what the district. Yeah. Yes. So
Yeah, last slide.
here we are, considerations.
I think we've spoken about all of this, but I do want to note, we're not talking about future years, we're talking about FY 25, so we know circumstances, counts, demographics. Those are gonna change, unlikely to be uniform changes across the state. And that there's just different ways to examine policy and funding changes. So this is one way of doing so, but depending on how granular you are and your constructs, you learn different things. That's all I have prepared.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Do you have takeaways for us? Or is that beyond your?
Takeaways in what regard?
Let this all, what lessons we might draw from this, or what conclusions we might draw from this?
I
Or
think.
what things might just sort of suggest anything?
Sure, I think one thing that I was really thinking about while working on this and putting these slides together is the impact on funding changes across the state based off of district boundaries, right? We did see those changes in different district configurations. So that's certainly something that I think is a policy question to hold in your mind in terms of thinking about where that falls in the policy conversation of those swings. You had the interesting question of everything that we're looking at here is funding allocations at the state level, but there's also within funding policy discussions, within a district, how is funding allocated? The impact of district boundaries and the determination of sparsity, right, is impacting that funding. And I think also the importance of keeping in mind that the ways that information is presented, right? We just looked at 4 or 5 different constructs and saw 4 or 5 different graphs. So dependent on the underlying assumptions to, I think, the conversation so far, those underlying assumptions really impact the story that's being told. Those are just the things off the top of my head.
Yeah. So
How long does it take to run these analysis for you to, how long did you put this together?
It's some work.
Days, weeks?
Oh, not weeks.
Get all the data.
It's work. It is my job.
Mhm.
It is what I do. I don't know if I could tell you in a number of hours because I
It's quite a lot.
staff many committees and many legislators. So I'm often going between requests, but it's feasible. I can certainly work with you, and it's not, it would not be feasible for me to every day come in with, 10 configuration.
Yeah.
If that's helpful.
That is. Just curious.
So one of the things you said that is making me think, that perhaps slightly differently, is that I had been thinking about it as the simple equation of larger districts tend to equal out what you said, I think, which is in a way obvious, but it's that even if it's large, where those boundaries are matters. Yeah, and that's a good thing to keep. That's, yeah. Yes.
The other takeaway that I got is there's definite winners and losers, and that's a political reality that we're all going to be facing here over the next.
Well, it sounds like none more than
than this guy.
Yeah, no, I get,
Counting with a big hit.
Yeah.
If we turn.
Yeah,
that to me was the most valuable piece of information out of this brief. Yeah, brief.
and I think if we get into breaking this down more, as you said, it's a combination of like some districts will go up just based on the foundation amount because it's more than because they're low spending and more efficiently organized to start with. And then the weights have huge implications.
Yes.
Well,
At which set of weights we're using have huge implications for us going forward.
if, I don't know how the House structured this part, because it's of great concern to me, but oh, yeah. I don't know why you're standing there either. If the larger the district is, there's the potential that they could use the money that's specific to certain students for the broader budget versus a district that is county or less. The smaller the district in a way, the more likelihood that the weighted dollars for those students stays close to them.
I think that that's depends on the policy construct, and it's very far outside of my bailiwick. I think that's more of a legal question versus me.
Beth okay, let's say your district was all of Chittenden County. I'll go with something I know. Your district's all of Chittenden County, but a lot of that money for ELL students is for Winooski. If your district is all of Chittenden County, did the House language create any considerations that you think would still draw that money to the schools where those students are?
That's St. James Office of Legislative Counsel. I am not as photographically familiar with the finance sections of this, so I can look back at it and give you an exact answer. But from the policy side of things, no, there's nothing in H 454 as passed by the House that changes school board duties in relation to allocation of funds within a larger school district than we have now. I believe, so that's, again, a common refrain here is really going to come back to and depend on the boundaries.
That's kind of what I'm getting at.
And is it also gonna depend on your superintendent to make sure that those dollars end up with that student?
Unless we change the policy language to be more, if you had one school district in the state and you wanted the money to get to the rural or low income or ELL kids, you would have to put in language that does that.
So it's something to be very mindful of.
So, yeah, so it was a good move in the football field.
Exactly.
Yeah. Somewhere else. Yeah.
I'd agree with that.
That makes sense.
So there,
Otherwise, it boils down to become a school board policy decision.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, so you gotta drive it. You may have to drive it somehow if that makes you more comfortable.
Well, I would just say for myself, I feel like it's what I got wrong with Act 127, that just basing it on, and I'm just, this isn't like a judgment on anyone or anything, but I feel like I failed to understand with Act 127 that changing the tax capacity and even changing the overall amount a district can receive doesn't guarantee that those kids are better off.
Correct, because it's like it goes into a general fund and it's like, oh,
let's
that's it.
So let's make sure we keep that in mind as we go forward here. Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That was, you did exactly what I asked you to do. It's very helpful.
That's why I just wondered how long, because it's like, it's very good.
So I think maybe after we meet with Andy, hopefully later, we may have something that we want to talk to you about.
Absolutely.
Okay, I think so. We have John coming in through that, right?
Sophie,
Okay, Sophie, that's right, Sophie. Yes, it's going to get free time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'd ask her if she wants to.
She shows, she will show up if you really throw them, fine.
Yeah.
So we can, why don't we, go at least audio off? And, we'll take a break until. Okay, we're back on. We're having a discussion about how to spend the next Friday.
So I'll reiterate, this is a group of students that have been following the governor's proposal, then the House proposal, and its journey to us pretty closely. They are engaged in a really inclusive process of finding other students who are interested in participating. So this is a joint hearing with House Education next Friday from 1 to 3. I would just say that 2 hours out of the many, many, many hours that we are spending on this process. When I had brought it up previously, it was we don't have enough to have the students comment. Now we have a House proposal. We have a very limited time, and it would mean a lot to me if we spent 2 hours listening to the end recipients of our policy work. So I will be there, and I will be encouraging Senator Hashim to go. So I think that means you wouldn't have a quorum.
Well, that's not the way I want to make a
Okay.
proposition.
Great.
I think the question for us is, we've got a couple of weeks to get a bill out. And given that, I mean, I could see, frankly, I'm sitting here thinking 2 hours is a lot less than 3. Given, because that was originally 3. 2 hours somehow seems like a lot less. We could come back afterwards and do a couple hours more work. We may have to be here till 5:30 or 6 that night. So
Just one observation. So we really have about 40 hours of committee time remaining before this bill has got to go one direction or the other. One work week. Okay, if you're put it in the, the normal work week, construct, 1 week to get this whole thing done. I think it's important to hear from the students. I think it should be, my recommendation would be an hour, but that's just a thought. But keep it focused so that kids have 5-minute slots and somehow they lottery who gets those slots. I think the message is important. But 40 hours of work time ahead of us is blazingly fast.
And will this be from kids from all over the state, you believe?
Okay, well, therein lies the question, right? Because I've been trying to help us coordinate with the House for a while now. And it's a lot to ask of the students who have been pulling a list together to all have 5 minutes to plan this. So I see their list and they have a list of students from all over the state.
Okay.
If you want to contribute one more student to the list, you can email me and we can fit it into this 2 hours. 1 hour feels pretty impossible for me to say, yes, please add more names to the list. And I don't think you're going to get a diversity of perspectives with just 1 hour.
Well, I think the student leaders can work on diversity of the message. That's.
Well, they're planning for a 2 hour hearing.
Well, that could change. There was 3, could be 1. That's a committee decision. But the fact is that, we have all these other associations and groups who aren't likely to come in here for 3 or 2 hours at a time for the remaining 40 work hours that we have to do this bill.
We could always have public hearings outside of our work hours. We could always have a public hearing. We should.
And I think we should, between now.
They have a specific time of break. This is coming on their break, and I don't think it's fair to students to squeeze them in a bigger hearing at some time in the evening that we haven't determined. I don't think that's fair to them. I'm gonna go to this, is all I'm saying. Then I really think this committee should participate, and it's actually really painful to be having this conversation that we're not sure if we want to hear from students.
I don't think anybody thinks that. I don't think anybody thinks that.
I did hear that.
No,
What
I
did
got
you say?
365 emails from constituents
Yeah,
that all want to have a say in this. And we can't fit them all in. So students are one category of people who want to be heard. So.
so we
I
could
won't
spend
do
our
that.
time planning more public hearings
I
to
won't
hear
do-
from teachers and
Okay,
parents. And
Public hearings are fine.
I would like to do that. That is clearly not on the table in this committee right now, which I think is a shame.
So I'm not.
It's on the table right now.
Then let's put it on the table.
Let's keep in mind here that the House had 3 months to get us a bill. We've got about 3 weeks to do our work. Now we've laid groundwork for it, but now they spent 3 months. Now they're having a public hearing after the bill's out of their committee, which is great. Listen, that's great, but we have to. My point is we've got X amount of time. I don't mind going, frankly. I would say, and I'm interested in hearing from kids, but it doesn't mean we'll be here much later that night, and so be it.
So be it. We should probably be here later every night it's not a 40-hour work week.
Yeah.
What may happen, what happened in Ag Day, the testimony was so compelling that you wanted to hear more. So that may happen. So hour and a half that you say, hey, you want to, or at least hour and a half, 2 hours. And if it's compelling, then you go longer, but
Well, we can't go longer because we're gonna have something scheduled for.
either, yeah.
We're gonna have something scheduled.
So,
Right, so
Unfortunately, like I said, I'll try to zoom in from
Great.
Drum, but
go to the hearing. Spend 2 hours and just make up the time.
I will note this, did the House have
They-
any input from students in their bill?
And I won't be here,
These,
but I can maybe get on just,
Look, we gotta move on.
okay.
What did they? I did just yesterday. I know.
these have been in the works for a while. We finally got to the student break. I don't think anybody was trying to
Okay.
decide exactly when.
So
Students are hard to schedule.
the next order of business is. We had, so I'm not driving. So I'm.
As it looks, it's Sophie's Anatomy.
Okay.
It just scares me.
Let's who we asked, this is sort of a follow-up on a little, something we touched on last week, which is the negotiation for health benefits. And just thought it would be worth taking the time to understand a little bit of the history and how it actually works, because the cost of healthcare is one of the driving forces that brings us to work on this larger bill. So I thought it made sense for us to understand how it works. So I know that you previewed this with me to make sure it made some sense, and thank you for that. So you know everybody on the committee at this point, is that accurate?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So if you then just would introduce yourself for the record, and
Yeah.
off we go.
So Sophie Zadatny, from the Office of Legislative Counsel. And I see that you have, my presentation in front of you. So do you want me to put it on the screen, or would you rather?
Yeah, put it on the screen
Okay.
only because of people watching this elsewhere. We all do have the hard copies.
Good. Yeah, so I do want to just clarify that I have no great depth of experience with this. So I looked at the legislation. I watched the testimony from last week that you had around the health benefits. I've looked at the arbitrator's decision, the fact finder's decision. Those are resources that are available at the end of, the links are available at the end of the presentation. So this is really an overview, but certainly if you want sort of the nuts and bolts of how it's working in practice, you would want to talk to, the school board and talk to the NEA and everyone else. So just want, with that proviso that I don't have great depth of understanding here.
And you made that clear to me. You just want this high level thing. We'll take it from here.
Okay. All right. So this is what I'm going to touch on. So the creation of the Commission on Public School Employee Health Benefits, Title 16, Chapter 61 is the statutory provision that governs the commission. And then just a little bit of background on Vermont's other Vermont labor laws and how contract negotiation impasses are resolved. So just very briefly, prior to 1993, healthcare was negotiated on a school district by school district level. In the 1990s, the Vermont National Education Association and the Vermont School Boards Insurance Trust got together and created the Vermont Education Health Initiative, VHI, which I suspect you have heard of before. And then VHI negotiated with Blue Cross Blue Shield to offer insurance plans that could then be used by public school employees. Each school district continued to negotiate with the unions at the local level, but over the plan offerings that had been developed with VHI. And then in 2017, Act 85, the legislature passed the act which penalized school districts that didn't require their employees to pay at least 20% of the premium cost for their health insurance, and also those districts that didn't limit the amount of the district's assistance towards the employees' out-of-pocket costs. And so then in 2018,
So make sure we all understand
Yeah.
this. So going back to the 1990s, that VHI is every school district operates under VHI.
so my understanding is VHI is sort of a separate entity that sort of develops the plans,
and works with Blue Cross Blue Shield. And so when school boards are negotiating with the employees, they're negotiating around plans that have been designed by VHI. And I'm going to glance at Rebecca. Okay. All right.
So that's a yes.
Yeah.
So that all is, yeah.
And so the goal, I think, has been to try to control the cost of healthcare, you know, that these Act 85, Act 11. And yeah. So Act 11 created this whole new subchapter in Title 16. Title 16 is the education.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but
Go ahead.
can a district, if it wants to negotiate, or could it, I guess, before, can negotiate outside of VHI?
My understanding is that's not what happens.
They don't-
Not what happened, correct?
Okay,
There isn't anything in statute specifically on that. So again, my knowledge is really
they could, but they don't. Is that accurate? Okay.
That was true until 20.
all right. Yeah. So Act 2018 created this commission on public school employee health benefits, and then and we're going to go through the act here, but the commission is then going to be responsible for determining the amount of premiums and the out-of-pocket expenses that are then paid by the school districts and the employees. And then school employees, and I'm flagging this for you, school employees is a broad definition under this section of Title 16. It includes teachers, administrators, supervisors, confidential employees, certified employees of a school employer, and any other permanent employee of a school employer not otherwise covered above. It does not include superintendents. And the reason I say that is because we will get into it a little bit later on, but the Labor Relations for Teachers and Administrators Act covers licensed teachers, nurses, and licensed administrators in the school system, but the unlicensed school support staff are not covered by the Labor Relations for Teachers and Administrators Act. That's covered by a different Labor Relations Act called the Municipal Employees Relations Act. So I'm just flagging for you the commission covers everyone, even though the employees themselves may be covered by a couple of different labor relations statutes. So just sharing that with you. So the commission is made up of 5 representatives of school employees. So there are 5 school employee commissioners. 4 of them are appointed by Vermont NEA and 1 by AFSCME. And that's because the way the statute is written is it's 4 are appointed by the union that represents the majority of staff, and then 1 is represented by the second largest union. And that's how it's worked out right now. So it's 4 is Vermont NEA and 1 is from AFSCME. So there are 5 union representatives, and then there are 5 representatives for the school employers, and they're appointed by the Vermont School Boards Association. And statutorily, appointees shall have an understanding of healthcare and employer-employee relations and demonstrate a willingness to work collaboratively. So this is an unusual kind of commission, because often commissions are sort of non-partisan, but this you have 5 and 5. So it is the representatives that are on there are representing either the employees or the school board employers.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
The 5 reference school employees appointed by the Vermont School Board Association, are any of them former NEA beneficiaries?
From the school employer side?
Yes.
I don't know the answer to that. I mean, often they are board members of, current school districts, but in terms of the history of whether any of them have previously been affiliated with the NEA, I don't know.
Anybody form know that?
Sue Siglowski, Vermont School Boards Association. The 5 that are appointed by the Vermont School Boards Association are either current or former school board members. And I'm not aware of any of them being a beneficiary of,
Being a future collecting NEA benefit.
correct.
Thank you.
I might chime in if I could.
Identify yourself for the record.
Rebecca McBrome, General Counsel for Vermont NEA. I just always like to remind people how many educators there are in the state. We have a large group of educators and then many spouses and family plans. So sometimes it's hard to actually think about
how many Vermonters and how many Vermont taxpayers are part of these plans. And when we got into the numbers, I'm sorry, I can't come off the top of my head right now, but I know I had it in some of my materials. We are talking about a lot of Vermont families that are on these health insurance plans.
So the statute provides, how the commission's going to work. So the commission is chaired jointly by one of the representatives of the school employees and one representative of the school employers. The commissioners can be removed by the appointing authority without cause. That's a recent change. So in 21, previously it was with cause, now it's without cause. And the commissioners can be removed so if you're a school employer commissioner, you can be removed by the Vermont, the school board. If you're a school employee commissioner, you can be removed by the school employee union votes. There are now a provision where each side has two alternate commissioners. So if for some reason a commissioner is removed, there are two alternates that each side have that they could, rapidly appoint someone else. Any decisions require the vote of a majority of the school employee commissioners and a majority of the school employer commissioners. So both sides need to agree on decisions, and that becomes relevant when you're picking like an arbitrator. You can't have, it's not a majority of the commissioners, it has to be a majority of each of both the school employer commissioners and the school employee commissioners. And then the statute provides for per diem and expenses for up to 20 meetings a year. And there are other provisions in there as well. One of them I'll just mention, but the commission is required to request from the governor a minimum of $35,000 in the annual budget be appropriated to the Agency of Education to help cover the cost of the per diem and the expenses. So the duties of the commission, and these are fairly narrow, what they're doing, because again, they're not designing the plans, that's all done by VHI. So the duties of the commission are to determine the percentage of premium paid by the employer and the employee. So is that an 80-20 split, or what is the split going to be? Determine the amount of an employee's out-of-pocket expenses for which the employer and the employee will be responsible. And then determining who will bear the first dollar responsibility for the out-of-pocket expenses. If they're using health reimbursement accounts, and then whether the health reimbursement account balance will roll over from year to year. And then the other item that the commission is responsible for is negotiating statewide grievance procedure for any disputes concerning the employee health benefits. And there are some other things. So, for example, they do not make any decisions around standard and vision or dental benefits. That's still negotiated at the local level.
So we'd say that again.
So dental and vision plans are done at the local level. They're not part of what the commission covers. There are pretty strict timelines set forth in the statute. So contracts shall not be less than 2 years in duration. They can be longer than that. The negotiations begin by April the 1st, the year before the current contract expires. So usually the contracts expire December 31. And so April of the preceding year is when you start the contract negotiations. Before you start the contract negotiations, so October 1st of the year before that, that's when information requests are made. Each side can request information from the other side, which is pretty standard when you're going into a negotiation.
Yes.
If I could, I'm going to go back to, if I could, Rebecca's comment. Not quite sure whose health plans we're talking about. Obviously, active educators, in this case, teachers and such. What about retired? Is the retired group in this conversation? No, please. And who handles their negotiations?
It's part of their retirement benefits and anything they would have. This is not, no, they're not part of these negotiations. Separate.
But they do end up with the insurance. So there's not part of the negotiations.
Right.
Okay.
I just didn't know if it was all one big group or if it was two separate groups, the retirees and the active.
No, it looks like all active employees other than superintendents are covered by what, the commission's responsibility. So again, information requests are made the October before negotiations begin, and those responses need to be provided by February 1, so 2 months ahead of negotiations beginning. And then the commissioners shall meet at reasonable times and negotiate in good faith. And good faith is a standard sort of term of art for labor negotiations. So just generally, I mean, good faith does not require you to concede everything the other side wants you to do. You just have to have a really good faith belief in the positions you take. You can stick to those positions, but you have to keep an open mind throughout negotiations and be seeking to find compromise and agreement.
Do we know where we are in the cycle?
Yes, thank you. I was going to say that. So the current contract was for a 3-year term starting January 1 of 23 and scheduled to expire December 31, 2025. But in March of last year, March 24, the parties agreed to extend the current 3-year contract for an additional 2 years. So right now, the current contract will run through December of 27.
And do you know why they got together and just extended it then?
You would need to ask them that.
I honestly, I think it was for the stability and try to retain teachers and to keep things stabilized because we were going through COVID. It just happened. There was massive shortages throughout the state, and realized it wasn't a good time for either side. School boards agreed with this to be going after any sort of benefits. We needed to keep people in those positions and retain and recruit.
Thank you.
And there was also acknowledgement that the overall system was the larger problem, right? These skyrocketing costs that were not being controlled by the bargaining process, shifting costs between the parties.
And then even with a December 31, 27 expiration date, again, just looking at the timelines, that means by April the 1st of next year, 26, the parties will need to begin negotiations. So that means by October 1st of this year, they would start the information request process. So it is a long process. So if parties are unable to reach agreement by August 1st, so again, they would have started April 1st. If by August 1st, they haven't reached agreement, then any matters remaining in dispute go to fact finding, and the parties can mutually agree on the fact finder. And again, that just goes back to what I was pointing out before. You need a majority of the school employers and a majority of the school employee commissioners to agree on the fact finder. If they can't agree, the statute provides that they can go to the American Arbitration Association and request a fact finder. The fact finder shall attempt to mediate the outstanding matters, so they'll work with the parties to find out where they're at and whether there's some common ground and try to close the gap between them. And then the fact finder's written report is due by September 15th. So I would just flag these are quite tight timelines. August 1st is when you reach an impasse, and then by September 15th, you're getting the fact finder's report. The fact finder's report is non-binding on the parties. And then if the parties can't reach agreement within 30 days after receiving the fact finder's report, then they go to arbitration. So often what happens when you get a fact finder's report is that you've had a neutral party look at the positions the two parties are in. And so it gives each side an opportunity to weigh, what they're seeking and then what the fact finder found. And often reasonable parties will then sort of reevaluate their position. Maybe they were really dug in on a particular issue. The fact finder wasn't buying it. You get a report back from the fact finder and it's like, oh, okay, that's a sort of weather check. Like, okay, maybe we need to rethink that. So often parties, and I'm just saying that generally I don't have any firsthand knowledge of this particular system, but generally in labor relations, often when a fact finder's report comes out, even if it's not binding, it enables the parties to finally close the gap, and they can use the fact finder's report to help persuade their constituents to, like, look, the fact finder found this, so it makes sense for us to, compromise on this issue. These procedures are all designed to just get the parties to move towards each other and try to narrow the number of issues that are in dispute and to encourage people to reach agreement.
Yes.
Who picks the arbitrator and the fact finder?
So the fact finder, the parties can choose the fact finder. They themselves can agree. And if they can't agree, then they go to the American Arbitration Association. And then again, if the parties can't agree on an arbitrator, So they could agree to have a single arbitrator. If they can't agree, then they can either request the Vermont Labor Relations Board to decide the remaining issues that are in dispute, or they can have a 3-member panel of arbitrators. And if they have a 3-member panel of arbitrators, one of them is selected by the school employee commissioners, one by the school employer commissioners. And again, either you can have those two individuals then pick the third person, or they can go to the American Arbitration Association and they'll pick someone if the parties can't agree. And then the parties submit their last best offer on all outstanding issues prior to the hearing. So last best offer is, again, each side's evaluating where they're at, what's really important to them, what they can give a little bit on, and then they come up with a single package of the issues that are remaining in dispute. And that's their last best offer. And the arbitrator, so whether it's a single arbitrator, the Vermont Labor Relations Board, or the 3-member panel of arbitrators, they then will determine which of the last best offers they're willing to accept. And they'll do a hearing. So again, the hearing has to be held on or before November 15th. This is just going through. So, and I've got the single arbitrator, but again, it can be a panel or it could be LRB. So the statute lists out the factors that the arbitrators are to consider with regard to the last best offer. So these are the factors here: the interest of the public, financial ability of the education fund and school districts to pay the costs, the comparisons of healthcare benefits with other employees, similarly situated employees, cost of living, and then the prior and existing healthcare benefits and coverage for school employees. And then the arbitrator has to issue their final and binding written decision within 30 days of the hearing. So that'll get you to December. So it'll get you before the end of the year. The arbitrator is required to provide a full explanation for the basis of their decision. And the arbitrator's decision is not ratified by the parties. Normally, when you negotiate a contract, once the people at the bargaining table have agreed, it then goes out to the members or to management, whatever, board of directors, whoever, to ratify the decisions that are made at the bargaining table. If you go through the whole way to arbitration, that's a final decision. There's no ratification vote after that. And the only appeal you would have is if there's fraud, corruption, something extraordinary has happened, you want to go to the court to contest it. But I mean, hopefully that would be very, very unusual and not happen here. There is no strikes or contract imposition under this particular provision in the statutes. And again, I note that because under the Labor Relations Teachers and Administrators Act, there is the right to strike, and school boards have the ability to unilaterally impose a contract if the parties hit impasse and they haven't been able to resolve the contract. But under this, there is no right to strike or contract imposition.
Because the decision of the arbitrator was final.
Right. And then I was just going to touch briefly on, so this is separate and apart from the language dealing with the commission, but just generally our labor relations statutes here in Vermont, we have 7 of them. And again, the teachers and the school support staff are covered by 2 different statutes: the Labor Relations for Teachers and Administrators Act and the Municipal Employee Relations Act. And all of these statutes function a little bit differently from each other. There's a lot of similarities, but there are a lot of differences. But all of these statutes, other than the Municipal Employee Relations Act, contemplate the use of last best offer. And so under the Labor Relations for Teachers and Administrators Act, my understanding is this doesn't happen very often. But if the parties, when they're negotiating their regular contract, so not healthcare, but everything else, if they reach an impasse and they choose not to go on strike or have the contract imposed, there is a mechanism whereby they can go to arbitration. And if they do, there's under that statute, unlike these other ones, under that particular statute, the arbitrator can choose either last best offer, an entire package from either side, or the parties can agree that the arbitrator can pick and choose. between the different offers, between the different issues. So I just flag that there are a variety of, as I say, these statutes all have their own slightly different approaches. Under the State Employees Labor Relations Act, if you hit impasse, you go to fact finding, mediation, fact finding, and then arbitration, whether it comes to the Labor Relations Board or an arbitrator. Again, you would look at the last best offer of either the union or management, but under that particular statute, the Labor Relations Board or the arbitrator can also look at the fact finders report. If neither of the parties' last best offer seems a good option, they can look at the fact finders report. And so generally what you want to do with last best offer, again, the goal is to push people to the middle. And so last best offer, your goal typically is you want to get as close to whatever the fact finder said, because again, they're a neutral party. And so an arbitrator, the next round, the arbitrator, Vermont Labor Relations Board, whoever's looking at it, they're going to see that as being sort of the middle path, and sort of a reasonable way to resolve the dispute. I think that's it. Oh, yeah, just generally, again, it's a multi-step process. So mediation, fact finding, arbitration. And again, if folks have questions, happy to answer those. I did include in the resources at the end, the statute, the teachers, the labor relations for teachers and administrators act, the link to VHI, the current agreement that's in effect, as well as the extension agreement, and then the fact finders report in the arbitration panel's decision, which led to the current contract that's in effect right now.
Senator Weeks.
Can you tell us why we're here, talking about this? I mean, I understand the topic. We picked it up a couple weeks ago. I think I understand the impasse, which is about the arbitrator picks one best final offer or the other. But why are we here, and and what vehicle do we have to make any change if we're making any change at all?
Well, she's here because I asked her.
That's exactly what I was about to say. I mean, my understanding, I don't know what other testimony you had. I just saw testimony that you had last week where there was interest in a proposal to either, I had listed out before the different considerations that an arbitrator considers, and there was a request from the school boards to add some additional factors that the arbitrator could consider. And there was also a request to, instead of having a last best offer in its entirety, so it's either, last best offer from this side or last best offer from that side, that an arbitrator be in a position to pick and choose between the two.
I get all that, but is this in the education, miscellaneous education?
No, the only reason we kind of are listening to this is because it's just, if we're thinking about education finance reform and the whole thing we're looking at, this is a major cost driver. And so just understanding this cost driver was what we want to add. There's actually a specific request from the Superintendent's Association to think about changing law before they go into negotiation again. And depending on what we do or don't do, it could have some impact on spending.
So going back to your question about school districts operating outside of BEHI, is it a policy decision whether they do or not?
I would just say generally, and this is just from general experience, I mean, typically, you're going to get a much better deal if you've got a bigger plan, right? So the more people that are participating in a plan, is going to be a way to reduce individual costs. So if each individual school district was developing those individual plans, I imagine it would be, you want to be in as big a pool as possible.
Right.
So I assume that's why
So if the state of Vermont has a state insurance plan and everybody was under it, then that would be a bigger pool.
Right. Yeah. The bigger the plan, the more you can distribute the risk is generally. And that way, if you've got folks that have got high costs, you can spread those out more evenly.
Yes.
We had that conversation last time we picked this topic up, and I think it was revealed that teachers are not actually state employees. So it couldn't be part of the state employee healthcare pool, whatever that right word is.
Which that I don't totally
I don't-
understand because the money comes from the state, correct, down to the schools. So your money's coming from the state.
It is from two funds.
Yeah.
Comes from the taxpayer,
Um,
and they all vote. Well, not all.
so the next contract, so the existing, contract expires the end
December of 27.
of 27. And under the law, the negotiations for that will begin effectively October of,
October 1st of this year, they would do information requests. They would actually start bargaining April 1st of 26.
Next year is
yes,
So at some point in the near future, is this contemplated to be a decision point within the transformation plan or some other vehicle?
I don't know. Okay. Yeah, don't know. Just that it came up and we just, as people we should at least have this grounding as we go forward.
which
Yeah.
draws the attention, question, sorry, that so we were talking last week of when you have two plans that the arbitrator can't say, hey, in the fact finding, if we take this out of this plan and this out of this plan, put it into here and here's a better, they can't do that now.
I'm not sure what when you say plan, these aren't, they're not making
Or
decisions.
not plans, but
Okay.
two
Offers,
contracts,
right,
contracts, offers, yeah.
right.
That when they're going through and each one has some good points that could be put into its own plan or contract. Right now, as I understand it, they don't have that ability, correct? It's either or offer.
Right, but the goal, so hopefully you get to the point, by the time you're in front of an arbitrator, that you're at the point where the issues in dispute have been narrowed. And again, this is what the commission does here is already a very narrow set of things that they're considering. When you're normally negotiating a contract, you could have, 150 different provisions, articles in your contract. So you may have many, many, many issues that you're negotiating over. And the whole process is to get you to, find agreement and get as close as you can. Here, there are a very limited number of issues that you're discussing. So in a way, it may be harder because you don't have the ability to kind of give and take on a lot of different issues. But yeah, the way this is structured right now, the arbitrator, whether it's the Vermont Labor Relations Board or a panel or a single arbitrator, they get to choose if they want the employee commissioners or the employer commissioners last best offer. They can't pick and choose between the different ones.
Could that be changed or do you believe it would be unwise to do that?
I mean, that's a decision that you will all need to make. I would say, one of the reasons I went through what happens under other statutes is almost all of them do provide for last best offer. That's a mechanism that's used heavily in Vermont. And again, the goal is to push people to really think about what can they let go and what's really important to them. And then they want their offer to be as reasonable as possible because you want that final decision maker to be like, okay, yeah, this seems the fairest and the best way to proceed. And that mechanism generally has worked very well. The only one where there's a mix and match is under the current labor relations, for teachers and administrators. And again, my understanding is it hasn't really been used because they don't really go to arbitration. But if they did go to arbitration, the parties can then choose between either having the arbitrator pick a single best package or being allowed to mix and match between the two packages. So they're just different mechanisms.
Although in your personal opinion, don't feel it. Okay, I was just saying, it's unwise to do it or not. That was, I can't answer that question.
It's just,
I retract that question.
yeah, the purpose of it is just to get people, to push people to the middle. So again, if you want to make your last best offer as attractive as possible, you're going to try to get it to be, as ideally as close to whatever the fact finder found. Because if there's a fact finder's decision, often people, again, that's a neutral person, not a partisan person. So that's kind of an indicator of, okay, that's what someone has come to.
So when I asked the question before about when the next round starts, you said this year, but actually it doesn't, you wouldn't,
Well, October 1st of this year,
but,
the information request.
but wouldn't that start in December? So, oh, no, that's right. Of course it was.
It expires December
Yeah, yeah.
27, so it
Yes,
would be
yeah.
April 1 of 26 is when the negotiations would start.
That would start, I thought that would start a year in advance. They started because April.
You know, it'd be April 1 of 26, because again, then you've got these,
Oh,
you know, the
time
fact
for that.
finding,
The
you've got the
time.
arbitration.
Okay, okay.
And so ideally, the way it's set up in the statute is, if you go through the whole process, the arbitrator's decision would come out essentially in December,
Yeah.
which would be 1 year before the contract expires.
Oh, it's a whole year before.
Right.
Okay, okay.
And I assume that's because you can't have the arbitrator's decision come out, you know, December 15th, and then January 1st, you've got to change the
Okay.
plan or, you know,
Yeah.
whatever. So it gives time for that. That's my assumption. So that's why there would be a year in that.
So
Yes.
is this the only testimony you scheduled on VHI?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I mean, I just wasn't sure if you wanted to interrogate why healthcare is a growing part of the overall cost of the budgets that are putting pressure on property taxes. I think, you know, my takeaway from being there when everyone thought we have one, you know, negotiating tool for this, it'll be a silver bullet, you know? But I think you see the NEA and teachers and folks continually coming back and asking for healthcare reform specifically because they are one of the larger bargaining and insurance pool entities in the state. And they still see how massive our increased costs are for accessing healthcare in the state, massive for their members, that teachers are paying a lot for their healthcare. Our communities are paying a lot for their healthcare. And this has now become so untenable that you have the Health and Welfare Committee looking at
Yeah.
reference-based pricing.
So, no, I don't have anything on. We don't want to do anything more than just get them. So, any other questions? So we unfortunately couldn't get, Tammy Colby until 4:40, so we'll take a break for an hour. And then be back for, so actually coming back at 4:30. But we have almost an hour.